What if the secret to a happier, freer life after 70 lies in letting go of something you've always been told you need? Friendships? It's a provocative thought, one that might stop you in your tracks. Imagine this: a quiet morning, the sun spilling through your window, a cup of coffee warming your hands, and no one to answer to, no calls to return, no plans to juggle, no pressure to keep up appearances. For years, society has drilled into us that a bustling social circle equals a life well lived. But what if, as the years pile up, that script flips? What if the key to thriving in your later years isn't found in crowded rooms or endless conversations, but in the peaceful embrace of your own company? As we age, something subtle yet profound happens. Our priorities shift. The things that once felt like oxygen, like maintaining a sprawling network of friends, start to lose their grip on us. And here's the truth that might catch you off guard: you don't actually need friends after 70. It's not as cold as it sounds. This isn't about shutting the world out or sinking into loneliness. It's about stepping into a new kind of freedom, one where your well-being takes center stage, unburdened by the expectations and obligations that friendships can carry. In this journey, we're going to dive deep into 6 reasons why letting go of friendships in your later years might not just be okay. It might be one of the best decisions you ever make. From unshackling yourself from the need for approval to savoring the quiet that comes with fewer ties, we'll explore how this shift can transform your mindset, your health, and your sense of self. Stick with me until the end, because what you discover might not only liberate you, it could redefine how you see your golden years. Let's begin. Number 1, you no longer need to prove yourself to anyone. Picture yourself at 25, standing in a room full of people, colleagues, acquaintances, friends, your laughter a little too loud, your smile a little too wide, all to ensure you fit in. Back then, friendships were a proving ground, a way to measure your worth against the nods and approvals of others. You might have stayed late at parties to be seen, swapped stories to be liked, or bent over backwards to keep everyone happy. It was exhausting, wasn't it? Now fast forward to 70. That frantic need to belong has faded, like a song you used to love but can't quite remember the tune to. One of the most liberating reasons you don't need friends after 70 is that you've outgrown the phase where social validation defines you. By this age, you've built a life, a career, a family, a legacy stitched together by decades of choices. The opinions of others, they're just whispers in the wind now, not the roaring gales they once were. You've seen enough of the world to know that true fulfillment doesn't come from a packed contact list or a chorus of applause. It blooms from within. There's no more chasing status through friendships, no more clutching at relationships to prop up your reputation. You are who you are, a tapestry of experiences and wisdom, and you don't need a crowd to tell you that's enough. Take Harold, for instance. At 72, he's a man with salt and pepper hair and a quiet demeanor, the kind of person who spent his life climbing the corporate ladder in a bustling city. For decades, his world was a revolving door of colleagues, clients, and so-called friends, people he golfed with, dined with, laughed with. But those ties? They were fragile, built on the shaky foundation of convenience. When he retired, the phone stopped ringing. At first, Harold felt a pang of loss. He'd sit by his window, watching the world go by, wondering why no one reached out. He even drafted texts, his thumb hovering over send, desperate to rekindle those fading connections. Then one crisp autumn day, as leaves swirled outside, he stopped. Why, he asked himself, am I chasing people who only knew me as Harold from the office? Why pour energy into bonds that were never truly his? Instead, Harold turned inward. He dusted off an old guitar he hadn't touched since his 20s, its strings brittle but eager to sing. He started taking slow walks through the park, noticing the way the light danced on the pond, details he'd missed in his rush to be social. For the first time in years, he didn't care if anyone liked him. No more forced small talk over lukewarm coffee, no more pretending to laugh at tired jokes. He was free to live for himself. And in that freedom, he found a joy he hadn't known he'd lost. That's the gift of this stage. When you stop seeking validation, you reclaim the energy you once spent on others. You don't need to prove yourself anymore. The only approval that matters is the one you give yourself. Number 2, peace becomes more valuable than socializing. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the hum of a crowded room. Glasses clinking, voices overlapping, the air thick with chatter. In your younger years, that sound might have thrilled you, a sign of life pulsing around you. But now, the sweetest sound might be the soft rustle of pages turning on the book, or the gentle patter of rain against your window as you sit in stillness. As you get older, something shifts deep inside, a quiet revolution where peace outshines the clamor of socializing. It's not that you hate people, it's that you've started to crave something more precious than company, calm. Friendships, even the best ones, come with strings attached. There are calls to return, lunches to plan, birthdays to remember. It's a dance of give and take, and for years you danced it well. But at 70, that rhythm can feel less like a waltz and more like a march, tiring, relentless. You have earned the right to step off the floor. Many social ties, however well-meaning, bring noise, drama, obligations, the fatigue of keeping up. And after decades of juggling it all, you begin to see that peace isn't just nice to have, it's essential. Consider Margaret, a 74-year-old woman with a warm smile and a closet full of floral scarves she's collected over the years. In her prime, she was the queen of connection, her kitchen table always surrounded by friends, her phone buzzing with invitations. Lunches with the girls, holiday parties, book club debates. Her calendar was a mosaic of social color. But as the years crept by, she noticed a change. The laughter felt forced. The stories looped like a broken record. Some friends called only to vent, their complaints piling up like storm clouds. Others gossiped endlessly, their words sharp and petty. What was once a source of Weichbaum had become a drain, a chore she dreaded. One rainy afternoon, Margaret made a choice. She declined a lunch invite, not out of spite, but because she simply didn't want to go. The guilt stung at first, a little voice whispering she was letting people down. But then she sat by her window, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, watching the rain streak the glass. The silence wrapped around her like a blanket, soft and warm. She didn't miss the chatter. Over the next few weeks, she leaned into that quiet, long walks through dew-kissed fields, hours lost in novels she'd shelved for years, mornings spent tending her garden, coaxing roses to bloom. Solitude wasn't lonely, it was a sanctuary. She realized she didn't need to fill her days with voices to feel alive. Peace, she found, was a companion all its own, one that asked nothing of her and gave everything in return. That's the beauty of this age. You're no longer bound to the social treadmill, running to keep up with expectations. You can choose calm over chaos, stillness over noise. If you've ever felt a twinge of guilt for pulling back, let it go. You're not retreating from life, you're stepping into a deeper kind of living, one where peace reigns supreme. Number 3, fewer friendships mean fewer disappointments. Have you ever poured your heart into a friendship only to watch it crumble when you needed it most? Maybe it was a phone call that went unanswered in a dark hour, or a promise broken when you'd counted on it. Life has a way of teaching us that not every friend wears the title well, and by 70, you've likely collected a few scars to prove it. One of the unsung gifts of letting go of friendships in your later years is this. Fewer ties mean fewer chances for disappointment. It's not cynicism, it's clarity. A hard-won understanding that trimming your social circle doesn't just lighten your load, it shields your peace. Friendships, no matter how bright they burn, come with expectations stitched into their fabric. You expect a call returned, a favor repaid, a shoulder when the world feels heavy. But what happens when those threads unravel? You're left holding the pieces, frustration when they don't check in, hurt when they drift away, exhaustion when you realize you've been rowing a one-sided boat. In your younger years, you might have brushed it off, made excuses, tried harder. But now you know your heart deserves better than that. At this stage, why carry the weight of relationships that don't carry you back? Take William, a 78-year-old man with a weathered face and eyes that crinkle when he smiles, though he doesn't smile as often as he used to. He spent his life building bridges to others, a carpenter of connections. There were buddies from his army days, pals from the factory floor, neighbors he'd shared decades with. He was the guy who'd drop everything to help, fixing a leaky pipe, lending an ear, hosting barbecues under summer stars. But over time, he noticed the scales tipping. Friends he'd known forever grew distant, too busy with grandkids, too distracted by their own lives. He'd call, they'd promise to call back, and the silence would stretch on. Once, when his wife passed, he waited for them to show up. Only a handful did. The sting of that absence lingered. At first, William blamed himself. Had he said something wrong? Was he too needy? But one evening, sitting on his porch with a glass of bourbon, the truth settled in like dusk. He hadn't changed, they had. Or maybe they'd never been what he'd hoped. So he stopped reaching out. He let the phone sit quiet, let the invitations fade. And something surprising happened. The disappointment faded too. No more waiting for replies that wouldn't come. No more nursing wounds from forgotten promises. He turned his energy to himself, restoring an old radio, planting a vegetable patch, listening to the crackle of vinyl records. Fewer friendships didn't leave him empty, they left him steady. That's the power of this choice. When you release the need for a wide net of friends, you release the letdowns that come with it. You're not shutting out love, you're choosing where to place it wisely. Quality over quantity becomes your compass, guiding you to the handful of souls who truly matter. Whether that's family, a lifelong confidant, or just the quiet strength of your own spirit. So if a friendship has ever left you feeling more drained than cherished, know this, it's okay to let it go. You've earned the right to a life with less heartbreak. Number 4, your time becomes more precious. Time slips through our fingers like sand, doesn't it? In your 20s, it felt endless, a vast desert stretching out, each grain a chance to laugh, to connect, to fill with noise and faces. You'd spend hours on the phone, nights at gatherings, weekends weaving a tapestry of social threads. But at 70, that desert narrows to a stream, each drop glistening with value. You start to see time for what it is, your most precious currency. And when you grasp that, you become fiercely selective about how you spend it. Friendships, even the good ones, demand a slice of that treasure. Calls to make, plans to keep, energy to give. But here's the question, is every slice worth it? At this age, you've danced through enough seasons to know what lights you up and what dims your flame. Some friendships feel like habits, old coats you wear because they're familiar, not because they still fit. Others are obligations, tugging at you with guilt rather than joy. You've got the right to pause and ask, does this add to my happiness or is it just another tick on the clock? Because after 70, every moment is a gift, and you've earned the freedom to unwrap it however you damn well please. Think of Richard, an 82-year-old with a shock of white hair and a laugh that rumbles like thunder when he lets it loose. Once, his life was a whirlwind of social color, dinner parties with clinking glasses, golf outings with rowdy banter, long phone calls catching up on gossip. He loved the bustle, the sense of being needed. But as the years piled on, that bustle started to weigh him down. Conversations that once sparked joy turned into marathons of complaints about health, about kids, about the weather. Gatherings he'd once craved felt like chores, the small talk a script he'd memorized. One Sunday, stuck at a lunch where the soup was cold and the whining was endless, he had an epiphany. I don't want this anymore. So Richard rewrote his days. He stopped saying yes out of reflex and started saying no with purpose. Instead of pouring hours into social upkeep, he poured them into what fed his soul. He'd sit by the river with a fishing rod, the water's ripple his only companion. He'd lose afternoons in the library, tracing history through dusty pages. He'd tinker in his shed, building birdhouses he'd never sell, just for the joy of the craft. And the kicker? He didn't miss the noise. His time became his own, a canvas he painted with colors he chose. Loneliness didn't creep in, fulfillment did, rich and deep. That's the magic of this shift. When you let go of friendships that don't spark joy, you don't lose, you gain. Time becomes yours again, to savor, to stretch, to fill with what matters. So if you've ever felt trapped by a social calendar you didn't sign up for, ask yourself, how do I want to spend my time? Because at 70, you don't owe it to anyone but you. Number 5. True companionship comes from within. What if the greatest friend you'll ever have is the one staring back in the mirror? It's a radical idea, one we're rarely taught. From childhood, we're pushed outward, make friends, join groups, seek connection. We're told happiness lives in others, that solitude is a ghost to flee. But at 70, you've walked enough miles to see through that lie. The truth unfurls like a flower in bloom. The most enduring companionship isn't out there. It's within you. You've spent decades becoming who you are, a library of stories, scars, and quiet triumphs. And with that self-knowledge comes a revelation. You are enough. Society doesn't make it easy to see this. Loneliness is painted as a villain, aloneness a tragedy. But there's a difference, a chasm between the two. Being alone isn't a sentence. It's a space, a chance to sit with yourself like you would an old friend. Some of the happiest souls at this age are the ones who've turned solitude into a sanctuary, not a cage. They've learned that joy doesn't need a crowd. It can thrive in the quiet corners of their own minds. Take Eleanor, a 76-year-old with silver curls and a voice soft as a lullaby. For years, she believed happiness meant motion. Plans with friends, coffee dates, group trips. She was a whirlwind of activity, always checking in, always filling the silence. But beneath the bustle, she felt a hollowness she couldn't name. The more she surrounded herself with people, the less she felt seen. One winter evening, snow blanketing her street, she canceled a dinner she dreaded. Instead, she lit a candle, pulled a blanket over her knees, and sat with a book. The stillness startled her, not with emptiness, but with warmth. She started listening to her own thoughts, tracing memories like threads in a quilt. From there, Eleanor built a new rhythm. She'd walk alone through the park, the crunch of leaves her soundtrack. She'd sip tea at a cafe, a novel her only companion, unbothered by the lack of chatter. She'd spend nights reflecting on her childhood, her dreams, the woman she'd become. And in those moments, she found something she'd chased in others: peace. She wasn't lonely, she was whole. The friendships she'd clung to out of habit fell away, and she didn't mourn them. Because when you befriend yourself, the need for external noise fades. You become your own light, your own laughter, your own anchor. Here's the secret. When you love your own company, the right people find you, not out of desperation, but ease. Connections that flow without force. So if you've ever feared letting go would leave you adrift, know this: the best companion you'll ever need is already here. You just have to meet them. Number 6, letting go opens the door to a more fulfilling life. Imagine standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind tugging at your clothes, a bundle of ropes in your hands, each one tied to a friendship, a duty, a should. Now imagine cutting them loose one by one, watching them drift away. What's left? Not emptiness, but space. Vast, open, yours. That's the power of letting go after 70. It's not about building walls, it's about tearing down the ones that boxed you in. Releasing the pressure to maintain friendships that no longer fit doesn't close doors. It flings them wide, inviting a life that's simpler, truer, fuller. We cling to things out of habit, don't we? Friendships that once sparkled can dull with time. Yet we hold on, showing up to gatherings we dread, answering calls from guilt, keeping up a facade because it's what we've always done. But what if you stopped? What if you gave yourself permission to shed what weighs you down and chase what lifts you up? That's where the magic happens, where life stops being a checklist and starts being yours. Consider James, a 79-year-old with a lopsided grin and hands rough from years of gardening. He used to think staying social was the key to a good life. He'd call old buddies, plan reunions, keep the threads of his past alive. But those threads grew brittle. Conversations looped. Same complaints, same nostalgia. Gatherings felt like reruns of a show he'd outgrown. One spring day, weeding his flower beds, he realized he was tired. Not of the dirt, but of the effort to stay connected. So he let go. He stopped forcing calls, stopped filling his days with noise he didn't need. What came next was a revelation. James traded coffee clatches for mornings with the sunrise, watching it paint the sky over his roses. He swapped group outings for solitary hikes, the earth solid under his boots. He dove into learning, podcasts on history, a sketchbook for doodles, a guitar he taught himself to strum. The weight of expectation lifted, and in its place grew a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't isolated, he was alive, more than ever, because his days aligned with his soul, not someone else's script. That's the promise of letting go. It's not loss, it's gain. Space for the small joys, the quiet victories, the peace of living on your terms. You wake to mornings unhurried, savor hobbies without interruption, feel the steady beat of your own contentment. Fulfillment doesn't come from a guest list. It comes from a life that feels like home. So if you've ever felt tethered to friendships out of duty, ask, what would I do with this freedom? Because once you cut those ropes, the view and the life is breathtaking. Final thoughts. Let's pause here at the end of this journey and breathe. The idea that you don't need friends after 70 isn't a sentence to solitude. It's an invitation to liberation. It's about shedding the shoulds that have shadowed you, choosing peace over pressure, and stepping into a life that's yours alone to shape. We've walked through 6 reasons why this shift can spark joy. Freedom from validation, the embrace of peace, the relief of fewer letdowns, the gift of time, the companionship of self, the fullness of letting go. What hit you hardest? Maybe it's the thought of quiet mornings uninterrupted, or the permission to say no without guilt. Maybe it's the realization that you've been enough all along. Think about it. Where are you holding on too tight? Are there friendships you've kept out of habit, draining you more than they fill you? Or have you already tasted the sweetness of your own company, wondering why you didn't claim it sooner? This isn't about turning your back on the world. It's about turning toward yourself, with kindness, with courage. I'd love to hear what stirred you. Drop a comment below. Tell me one thing that clicked, one way you'll carry this forward. Your voice matters, and it fuels this space we share. If this resonated, if it lit a spark or soothed a doubt, give it a like, hit subscribe, share it with someone who needs it. Your support keeps these stories alive, lighting paths for others. Thank you for being here, for walking this with me. Until next time, here's to living free, full, and true at 70 and beyond.